All right, hey everybody, Shane Speakman, Vice President of UCaaS here at Telarus. And today I'm excited to announce that we have a new platform for learning, and this is our Lightboard series. One of the things that you're going to see is that in 2021, we will try to inundate you with as much information so that we can arm you to go out into the world with all of your end users. Today, what we thought about was, well, let's talk about UCaaS and the basics of it. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that UCaaS is still very sexy, very relevant, and it's growing rapidly. So what we want to do is talk about the 4 pillars of UCaaS. Now, whether you've done this forever and you've lost as much hair as I have trying to understand this crazy industry, or if you're new into the industry and you're just starting to figure out this whole cloud computing and cloud system, we've got some great advice, some really easy information to digest. We're going to talk a little about that. So again, we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of UCaaS. Now, when you think about UCaaS, it's really interesting to note this is a fairly new term, right? Back in the premise PBX days, we had analog service, and it was really sexy to turn something from an analog signal into a digital signal. We started to compress it with some G.729, and we were on the cutting edge of voice technology. And as we moved past that, we started to see VoIP come into existence, and we saw whether it was digital voice or hosted PBX or just the UC term. Here we are with unified communications as a service. And so what is that? So first of all, let's talk about the changing landscape. Over the past few years, obviously we've seen a lot of consolidation, we've seen new technology, we're using technology differently, and it is speeding up, it's happening faster than ever. And if I haven't said this before, if you haven't heard it, it's important to note, and that is the decisions that your customers are making right now about their voice platform are some of the most important that they will make for the next 5 to 10 years. This is how they communicate with their employees and their customers. And the technology that's being introduced it's more rapid, it's speeding up, and what we're seeing is that the adoption is only as good as the information being disseminated to them, and obviously that's our job. And so the landscape, as we see it, is changing fast. Sometimes hard, especially if you're an IT director or a CTO, it's not your primary responsibility to look after those types of technologies. So we're going to talk about that. Secondly, again, if 2020 taught us anything, it's the fact that end users are working differently, and so our needs are very different than they were when we were stuck in an office all day. This term, work from home, and now work from anywhere, has become ubiquitous with how we interact with our companies. And so it's important that we have suppliers, technology, and just the understanding of what's available to be able to accomplish this and to adjust as these needs evolve. The third pillar that we're going to talk about are the verticals and the specific needs that some of them have, and how we've got some suppliers who are really digging deep and performing really great operations into how a specific vertical communicates. And the fourth pillar that we'll talk about is the concept that you may have a great PBX that works for today, but with all of this and how quickly we're changing the way that we communicate, again, with our customers and with our employees, it's important that you not just pick a platform based on the brand name or who the hottest or who the newest may be, but really understand that a platform needs to scale and it needs to be future-proof. So understanding these 4 pillars, let's talk a little about each of these. First of all, if you saw the Gartner Magic Quadrant for 2020, it introduced 2 suppliers who really hadn't been relevant in the past. And these are disruptors to us. And so understanding that there are disruptors right now in the UCaaS space is important. A couple of those are Zoom and Microsoft. I don't think we can even go a day without having a conversation about Microsoft Teams. JP Morgan put out a financial report that talked about Zoom and the amount of monthly active users, and recently they just hit their millionth Zoom phone user. So these types of disruptors that are out there, it's important to note what they're bringing to the industry. We also continue to see the trend that there was a lot of M&A activity. We've continually seen consolidation in this space, whether it's a premise-based system buying a cloud-based platform, or if there were some strategic relationships that came together over the past couple of years, such as Avaya and RingCentral, that becomes important. But what we've seen is that as this consolidation has occurred, or as the trend from these premise-based systems to gobble up all of these new and innovative companies in the cloud space, that this presents opportunity for us, and it gives us an advantage when we look at how exactly those legacy systems are being used in the environments today. So let's also talk about the needs of the users. Obviously, this work from home or work from anywhere concept was the theme of 2020. And the ability that we now have to pivot, to work from anywhere, it becomes the norm. And so one of the constraints that we saw, even within our own industry, was, are we poised to accomplish this? You know, it's almost an embarrassing stat that when you look at the master agents in our space, there were really only a couple who were on cloud platforms who were able to pivot quickly so that we could all go home and continue to be effective so that we could cover your needs. We're excited to say, of course, that Telarus was one of those. So the other need that I think a lot of users had was really understanding the architecture and the whole collaborative suite. Of course, none of this works if we don't have an underlying system that allows us to perform these applications over the network. But what we also saw was that there was more consumption. There was a need for really strong bandwidth. And when you look at the complete collaborative suite, it became something that we all used. My kids used it as they interacted with their school teachers. I used it with a lot of you and a lot of our peers. And of course, even my wife with her friends decided, you know, a good UCaaS type platform was fun to keep in touch with. So whether we're talking about the Zoom meetings or whether it was the freemium version, my children happened to be on Microsoft Teams. What we saw was that those three different pieces, video, voice, and the chat feature, became really popular methods of communication. So as these end user needs continue to evolve, what we also saw was that certain verticals had to pivot and adapt to how that new world was looking. Who would have thought that we would have a conversation with our doctor over a video platform? You remember the days when you couldn't even talk to the front desk person about a prescription because of some type of HIPAA compliance. And now what we have is encrypted data being sent from the luxury of our own and the comfort of our own living room. So when we look at the different technologies within the verticals, what we saw were a lot of advancements and a lot of suppliers who really came to the aid of these verticals. And so we focused on a few this year: the automotive changes, the healthcare. We also saw that a lot of the financial institutions had to pivot in how they worked, especially when you consider the different types of compliance that they're subject to. And I mentioned it earlier, the education and government space was also severely impacted. And so what was really great to see was that we had a handful of suppliers who were already dedicated to that space and were able to pivot quickly to scale for a lot of the needs within that. We have toolkits that are available through Telarus and through a lot of the suppliers, so that if you're looking for, or if you have a certain opportunity within one of these spaces, we have the ability to really show some case studies, some integrations with very popular software. And I think that as we continue to look at the technology within the verticals, you'll continue to see more and more advancements so that it starts to weed out some of the fray and you really start to focus in on very specific suppliers and different types of technologies that are required. Let's also talk about platform changes. You know, in the past, if you would have said that we would have advanced analytics or AI be introduced into a voice world, especially in a UCaaS or UC type of environment, I would have thought that you were mistaking us for a contact center. But what we've seen is that now there are a lot of these users who are now contact center light type users. And so AI has become a big part of the conversation. And this may not be something that your customer is utilizing right now, but it's important to note that the advances will continue to become more of the norm. And whether it's IBM Watson or Amazon Lex or some of the others that are being introduced, you will at some point have the conversation with a user who doesn't even have this on their radar. You know, what's interesting is I recall when I was managing direct reps, I had a sales guy who said on his voicemail, "Don't leave a message, just text me." And I thought, that's so unprofessional. How could you leave a voicemail for someone just to text you in a business environment? And clearly, that's become the norm. So as we look at some of the different ways that we are interacting with our customers, that text platform becomes even more important. And while a certain industry may not be utilizing that right now, making sure that you have a platform that can integrate with text or chat becomes imperative. We also see that within these different platform changes that there are, we'll put the analytics up here, but in addition to that, what we're seeing is that there is the need for that contact center UC play, and it becomes somewhat ambiguous as to which side of the aisle you may fall on. And so if you have a complete collaborative tool, a supplier that has that CC functionality and that UC functionality, it really becomes that one-stop shop. So within that analytics, I like to put that this is almost a contact center or UCaaS light type of a consideration. As we continue to grow, as the technology advances, who knows what's next? But what's important is that these pillars can be the foundation for any conversation. And as you'll see in some of the other series that we have, we go deeper into each of these. We've built out a whole mind map that quite candidly can be a bit overwhelming at times, but this at the core is the basic conversation that we should be having with our different customers. Hope, if nothing else, that this provides a little bit of insight, and if you want any more information, let us know. Thanks.